Okay, I really wasn't sure if I wanted to make a guide on Tove, but I threw some tickets at the gacha, and she responded to my summons. Plus, after reading up on Tove and doing some testing on my own, I think there is enough to be said about a unit like this to warrant a video. So here we are. Today, let's answer the question, Tove, is she any good? Well, you probably got a good idea if you saw the thumbnail, but then you wouldn't be watching this video if you didn't want to find out for good. And no, I will never stop making cursed thumbnails. Let's begin with the guide. What is Tove anyways? Well, from a brief glance at her kit, we can see that she is a buffer for shotgun teams. But this isn't the first time shotgun supports existed, so what makes Tove any different? Let's take a closer look. I'll be using my skill leveling criteria as I have in my past guides, so prepare your upgrade modules. Tove's kit has some interesting mechanics. Skill 1 is a self-reload talent that also affects allies. When firing, so when Tove fires a shot, but it doesn't need to hit anything, it will activate a state called emergency crafted bullets that auto-reloads a certain amount of her own magazine, based on a percentage chance of occurring. When ECB state activates, she will create another state called temporary modifications, or in short I'll call it temp mod, that affects all allies, where it increases their max ammo count and crit damage for 5 seconds, stacks up to 3 times. Since the ammo buff is either only 1 or 2, the skill benefits units with a low ammo count to begin with. But after looking at the skill for a bit, there's more to discuss. Now, I don't believe I've seen anything like this before, but the chance that ECB triggers actually depends on the skill level. At base, the activation chance is only 2% per shot, but it increases to 3% at level 3, 4% at level 6, and 5% at level 9. In addition, Temp Mod's ammo buff also scales with skill level. This means the effectiveness of the skill actually scales exponentially, and it's to your best interest to level this to a high level, as having these buffs will also affect how good Tove's other parts of her kit are. You don't have to max it out, but since the activation chance is 5% at level 9, I would recommend leveling this to 6 or 9 if you can commit to the resources. Assuming that it does have a trigger chance of 5%, and given that Tove is an AR user with 60 shots in one magazine, it will mean that on average, she will activate this once every 20 shots, which perfectly stacks the buffs to 3 counts from firing a full magazine. Of course, sometimes RNG doesn't work out in our favor, but thanks to the ammo refund and some potential help from cubes and overload lines, you can expect all 3 stacks after the first 5 to 10 seconds of battle, assuming she keeps shooting. Skill 2 only triggers when Temp Mod is fully stacked at 3, which just reinforces the priority to level Skill 1 to a high amount. All allies will get a crit rate increase, and all shotgun users get an attack speed buff. Crit rate is pretty much useless due to how damage is calculated in the game, but the attack speed is pretty good. This skill gets a medium priority. Mainly for the shotgun users, I would range my upgrade between levels 4 to 7, depending on how much you're willing to part with the resources. Burst skill. All allies gain an attack up based on Tove's own attack stat, and all shotgun allies gain an additional attack up. The 2 abilities will also match the total amount of stacks of Temp Mod from skill 1. So if all 3 stacks are activated, each of the 2 attack ups will also stack 3 times. So, assuming the numbers at level 10, this would essentially translate to all allies gain a 6.96% attack up, and in addition, all shotgun users gain a 72.63% attack up. These are not small numbers. Assuming your Tove has some decently invested levels in gear, she can inject some serious damage into your shotgun teams. This one gets medium priority, depending on how much you want to invest. However, something I don't really like about Tove's kit is how dependent Skill 2 and the Burst are on Skill 1. Both abilities work the best when all 3 stacks of Temp Mod are activated. The problem is that the chance of triggering Temp Mod at all is affected by the Skill 1's level. This essentially means that as a support, Tove is oddly resource hungry, but is the large resource requirement worth the amount of support she brings? Well, kind of. Let's get to gearing. I won't dwell too long in this section, mainly because Tove is a supporter, meaning that she is not expected to do much damage anyways, so any damage modifiers aren't that useful. One thing I do want to note is that her attack ups scale with base attack, and not final attack. There is a difference between the two. If the skill description just reads attack, it means that it will scale with whatever the stat says on the profile page. so it's affected by level, limit breaks, bond level, and gear level. Realistically, the only stat that Tove would want is max ammo capacity. More shooting means less reloading, which means she activates the 3 stacks of temp mod quicker. Given that the headpiece and the gloves give the most amount of attack, level those, but don't feel too pressured to reroll overload lines. There's just way better units to use your custom modules on. I won't even do an overload line tier list this time around because I don't think it's worth rocking your head over this too much. For cubes, it's gonna be either Resilience or Bastion, because, you guessed it, they allow Tove to shoot bullets for longer, which means she reaches 3 stacks of temp mod quicker. Now we get to teams, which is where the majority of the analysis takes place. From what we learned from Tove's kit, we can see that she buffs shotgun users' damage by a considerable margin. This means she's a natural fit for shotgun comps. Ideally, we want a CDR unit for the Type 2 slot, so the best and only candidates will be Dala or Summer Helm. The rest of the 3 slots can be filled by any shotgun DPS users, the most prominent ones being Sugar, Drake, Maiden, Isabel, and so on. One thing I do want to warn is that you should be careful with putting units with the last shot fired effects. So try not to use Pepper, Dorothy, and here's the big one, Summer Anis, even though she's a shotgun user and is pretty top tier. One way you can circumvent this is by putting Privati in the last slot, and while I don't have evidence to back this up, you can offset the ammo increase with Privati's decrease. It's almost like we went full circle. One thing I don't like about this setup is that it leaves your team with no defensive or healing options. You can use Helm as the last slot for a Type 3 healer, though she's not using a shotgun. You can use the bunny comp, but there's no Type 3 CDR unit in the game at the moment, so that still makes it a bit awkward. You can also use Marciana as a Type 2 as she is a standalone healer, but that would still leave you with no CDR unit. Now, in the right cases, a healer or a defender is not exactly needed, but here is where I'm gonna start criticizing Tove. She is an excellent shotgun supporter. The major issue here is that shotgun comps aren't exactly what's considered meta at the moment. In the bulk of late game content, there is a lot of need for units to destroy enemy parts or hitting them from far away. Due to the low accuracy of shotguns, you can't exactly find ways to solve this problem. Now, there are some outlier shotgun users that actually become quite good with Tove, like Sugar and Drake. But the way I see it, Tove serves a specific purpose, but that purpose is just not very good at the moment. She's kinda like a future-proof supporter that, unless we get more meta shotgun users or the shotgun archetype gets buffed in general, these teams are really considered quite niche and will only work in specific encounters. While I wasn't running this channel during the summer, I would rate Tove the same as Summer Mary or Mast, where they buff units in a particular way, and while I'm all for new comps and synergies to rise, the teams are just not as good as what we have now. Or the situations where they are good is very far and in between. So why not just use something that's good all the time? So what can we say about Tove? She is a solid shotgun supporter that's, for some reason, also quite resource hungry for upgrades. Due to how her skill 2 and burst depend on leveling her skill 1, in order to work well, you're gonna have to sink a good amount of your upgrade modules in order for Tove to reach a semi-competitive level. For me, while that is something you can do if you really want your Sugar, Drake, Maiden, or Isabel to shine, but just know that shotgun comps are good but not broken. Tove gets a 3 out of 5 rating from me. If you're questioning whether or not to pull, I would say if you don't really care about shotgun comps, then it's perfectly fine to skip, as she is a future-proof supporter that may get better later on. Plus, she is a permanent unit, so you can always get spooked by her at any time. And I find it quite difficult to argue that someone should pull for a unit just because they might be broken later on. And for me, a 3 out of 5 hovers around the line of, if you want a unit to be good, then they can be good, but ultimately is not mandatory for progression or has that high of a potential. Anyways, that's what I think of Tove. Let me know if you were able to pull a copy of this questionable survivalist and who you would like me to cover next. Thank you for watching, and always remember, have fun with the game.